Hi. So I'm not sure what happened there. That was kind of weird. I I started streaming and it kind of locked up, and I don't know. But either way, I'm not sure what happened. But it looks like it's going good now. So yay. That's all right. Yummy coffee. So I should get that all tweetered out, hey? And then we'll let's see, refresh that. Refresh that, and that should be good now. Pop out the chat again. Tweeter it out. And tweeter it out. And let's see. I'm just glad everybody can't see all my stuff again now. Not that I really mind it, but you know, still. Let's see. Where is the... There it is. Now that minor technical difficulties is done. So you still there, honey? I'm glad you're still there. Looks like you're still there. You're still there. Coffee, the nectar of life. You're way too funny, honey. Funny, honey. I made it funny. Coffee. So there's 3 chapters because the last 2 are really long, so I'll leave those for. Well, they're not really long. But it would end up being longer than an hour or so. And it definitely still PG and funny. Funny as heck. I'm good with that. Oh, wrong window. I don't need to go seeing my ugly mug. Especially half asleep mug. So now, yeah, we got things going again. So yay. So what I'm doing is stuff with things and things with stuff. But anyway. Oops, I need the other window open because I have to remember to pause it. I wonder if I could get a pretty mug. It's full of coffee. Sweet, sweet coffee. And French vanilla creamer. I could see you going, I wish my woman would look at me the way she looks at her coffee. I do look at you. You're bad. PG bad even. Man, it is so windy here. Like, I'd almost say it was as windy as when you come up. But I'm going to get this started, so, because we're already behind. And, yeah, so, let's see here. Exit out of there. And mute me.
Section 9 of East of the Sun and West of the Moon. This is the LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Vaughan, East of the Sun and West of the Moon by Christen ASBJØRNSEN and Jørgen Engebretsen MOE. Translated by Jørgen Engebretsen. Section 9. The Giant Who Had No Heart in His Body. Once on a time there was a king who had 7 sons, and he loved them so much that he could never bear to be without them all at once, but one must always be with him. Now, when they were grown up, 6 were to set off to woo, but as for the youngest, his father kept him at home, and the others were to bring back a princess for him to the palace. So the king gave the 6 the finest clothes you ever set eyes on, so fine that the light gleamed from them a long way off, and each had his horse, which cost many, many £100, and so they set off. Now, when they had been to many palaces, and seen many princesses, at last they came to a king who had 6 daughters. Such lovely king's daughters they had never seen, and so they fell to wooing them, each one. And when they had got them for sweethearts, they set off home again, but they quite forgot that they were to bring back with them a sweetheart for Boots, their brother, who stayed at home, for they were over head and ears in love with their own sweethearts. But when they had gone a good bit on their way, they passed close by a steep hillside, like a wall, where the giant's house was, and there the giant came out, and set his eyes upon them, and turned them all into stone, princes and princesses and all. Now the king waited and waited for his 6 sons, but the more he waited, the longer they stayed away. So he fell into great trouble, and said he should never know what it was to be glad again. And if I had not you left, he said to Boots, I would live no longer. So full of sorrow am I for the loss of your brothers. Well, but now I've been thinking to ask your leave to set out and find them again. That's what I'm thinking of, said Boots. Nay, nay, said his father, that leave you shall never get, for then you would stay away too. But Boots had set his heart upon it, go he would, and he begged and prayed so long that the king was forced to let him go. Now, you must know the king had no other horse to give Boots but an old broken-down jade, for his 6 other sons in their train had carried off all his horses, but Boots did not care a pin for that. He sprang up on his sorry old steed. Farewell, father, said he, I'll come back, never fear, and like enough I shall bring my 6 brothers back with me. And with that he rode off. So, when he had ridden a while, he came to a raven, which lay in the road and flapped its wings, and was not able to get out of the way, it was so starved. Oh, dear friend, said the raven, give me a little food, and I'll help you again at your utmost need. I haven't much food, said the prince, and I don't see how you'll ever be able to help me much, but still I can spare you a little. I see you want it. So he gave the raven some of the food he had brought with him. Now, when he had gone a bit further, he came to a brook, and in the brook lay a great salmon, which had got upon a dry place and dashed itself about, and could not get into the water again. Oh, dear friend, said the salmon to the prince, shove me out into the water again, and I'll help you again at your utmost need. Well, said the prince, the help you'll give me will not be great, I dare say, but it's a pity you should lie there and choke. And with that he shot the fish out into the stream again. After that he went a long, long way, and there met him a wolf which was so famished that it lay and crawled along the road on its belly. Dear friend, do let me have your horse, said the wolf. I'm so hungry the wind whistles through my ribs. I've had nothing to eat these 2 years. No, said Boots, this will never do. First I came to a raven, and I was forced to give him my food. Next I came to a salmon, and him I had to help into the water again. And now you will have my horse. It can't be done. that it can't, for then I should have nothing to ride on." "Nay, dear friend, but you can help me," said Greylegs the wolf. "You can ride upon my back, and I'll help you again in your utmost need." "Well, the help I shall get from you will not be great, I'll be bound," said the prince, "but you may take my horse, since you are in such need." So when the wolf had eaten the horse, Boots took the bit and put it into the wolf's jaw, and laid the saddle on his back. And now the wolf was so strong, after what he had got inside, that he set off with the prince like nothing. So fast he had never ridden before. "When we have gone a bit farther," said Greylegs, "I'll show you the giant's house." So after a while they came to it. "See, here is the giant's house," said the wolf. "And see, here are your 6 brothers, whom the giant has turned into stone. And see, here are their 6 brides, and away yonder is the door, and in that door you must go." "Nay, but I daren't go in," said the prince. "He'll take my life." "No, no," said the wolf. "When you get in you'll find a princess, and she'll tell you what to do to make an end of the giant. Only mind and do as she bids you." Well, Boots went in, but, truth to say, he was very much afraid. When he came in the giant was away, but in one of the rooms sat the princess, just as the wolf had said, and so lovely a princess Boots had never yet set eyes on. "Oh, heaven help you! Whence have you come?" said the princess, as she saw him. "It will surely be your death. No one can make an end of the giant who lives here, for he has no heart in his body." "Well, well," said Boots, "but now that I am here, I may as well try what I can do with him, and I will see if I can't free my brothers, who are standing turned to stone out of doors. And you, too, I will try to save. That I will." "Well, if you must, you must," said the princess, "and so let us see if we can't hit on a plan. Just creep under the bed yonder, and mind and listen to what he and I talk about. But, pray, do lie as still as a mouse." So he crept under the bed, and he had scarce got well underneath it, before the giant came. "Ha!" roared the giant. "What a smell of Christian blood there is in the house!" "Yes, I know there is," said the princess, "for there came a magpie flying with a man's bone, and let it fall down the chimney. I made all the haste I could to get it out, but all one can do, the smell doesn't go off so soon." So the giant said no more about it, and when night came, they went to bed. After they had lain a while, the princess said, "There's one thing I'd be so glad to ask you about, if I only dared." "What thing is that?" asked the giant. "Only where it is you keep your heart, since you don't carry it about you," said the princess. "Ah, that's a thing you've no business to ask about, but if you must know, it lies under the door-sill," said the giant. "Ho, ho," said Boots to himself, under the bed. "Then we'll soon see if we can't find it." Next morning the giant got up cruelly early, and strode off to the wood, but he was hardly out of the house before Boots and the princess set to work to look under the door-sill for his heart. But the more they dug, and the more they hunted, the more they couldn't find it. "He has balked us this time," said the princess, "but we'll try him once more." So she picked all the prettiest flowers she could find, and strewed them over the door-sill, which they had laid in its right place again, and when the time came for the giant to come home again, Boots crept under the bed. Just as he was well under, back came the giant. Snuff, snuff, went the giant's nose. "My eyes and limbs, what a smell of Christian blood there is in here!" "I know there is," said the princess, "for there came a magpie flying with a man's bone in his bill, and let it fall down the chimney. I made as much haste as I could to get it out, but I dare say it's that you smell." So the giant held his peace, and said no more about it. A little while after, he asked who it was that had strewed flowers about the door-sill. "Oh, I, of course," said the princess. "And pray, what's the meaning of all this?" said the giant. "Ah," said the princess, I'm so fond of you that I couldn't help strewing them, when I knew that your heart lay under there." "You don't say so," said the giant, "but after all it doesn't lie there at all." So when they went to bed again in the evening, the princess asked the giant again where his heart was, for she said she would so like to know. "Well," said the giant, "if you must know, it lies away yonder in the cupboard against the wall." So, thought Boots and the princess, then we'll soon try to find it. Next morning the giant was away early, and strode off to the wood, and so soon as he was gone, Boots and the princess were in the cupboard hunting for his heart, but the more they sought for it, the less they found it. "Well," said the princess, "we'll just try him once more." So she decked out the cupboard with flowers and garlands, and when the time came for the giant to come home, Boots crept under the bed again. Then back came the giant. "Snuff, snuff, my eyes and limbs, what a smell of Christian blood there is in here." "I know there is," said the princess. "For a little while since there came a magpie flying with a man's bone in his bill, and let it fall down the chimney. I made all the haste I could to get it out of the house again, but after all my pains, I dare say it's that you smell." When the giant heard that, he said no more about it, but a little while after, he saw how the cupboard was all decked about with flowers and garlands, so he asked who it was that had done that. Who could it be but the princess? "And pray, what's the meaning of all this tomfoolery?" asked the giant. "Oh, I'm so fond of you, I couldn't help doing it when I knew that your heart lay there," said the princess. "How can you be so silly as to believe any such thing?" said the giant. "Oh, yes, how can I help believing it, when you say it?" said the princess. "You're a goose," said the giant. "Where my heart is, you will never come." "Well," said the princess, "but for all that, 'twill be such a pleasure to know where it really lies." Then the poor giant could hold out no longer, but was forced to say, "Far, far away in a lake lies an island. On that island stands a church. In that church is a well. In that well swims a duck. In that duck there is an egg, and in that egg there lies my heart. You darling!" In the morning early, while it was still grey dawn, the giant strode off to the wood. "Yes, now I must set off too," said Boots. "If I only knew how to find the way." He took a long, long farewell of the princess, and when he got out of the giant's door, there stood the wolf waiting for him. So Boots told him all that had happened inside the house, and said now he wished to ride to the well in the church, if he only knew the way. So the wolf bade him jump on his back, he'd soon find the way, and away they went, till the wind whistled after them, over hedge and field, over hill and dale. After they had travelled many, many days, they came at last to the lake. Then the prince did not know how to get over it, but the wolf bade him only not be afraid, but stick on, and so he jumped into the lake with the prince on his back, and swam over to the island. So they came to the church, but the church keys hung high, high up on the top of the tower, and at first the prince did not know how to get them down. "You must call on the raven," said the wolf. So the prince called on the raven, and in a trice the raven came, and flew up and fetched the keys, and so the prince got into the church. But when he came to the well, there lay the duck, and swam about backwards and forwards, just as the giant had said. So the prince stood and coaxed it till it came to him, and he grasped it in his hand. But just as he lifted it up from the water, the duck dropped the egg into the well, and then Boots was beside himself to know how to get it out again. "Well, now you must call on the salmon to be sure," said the wolf. And the king's son called on the salmon, and the salmon came and fetched up the egg from the bottom of the well. Then the wolf told him to squeeze the egg, and as soon as ever he squeezed it, the giant screamed out. "Squeeze it again," said the wolf. And when the prince did so, the giant screamed still more piteously, and begged and prayed so prettily to be spared, saying he would do all that the prince wished if he would only not squeeze his heart in two. "Tell him, if he will restore to life again your 6 brothers and their brides, whom he has turned to stone, you will spare his life," said the wolf. Yes, the giant was ready to do that, and he turned the 6 brothers into king's sons again, and their brides into kings' daughters. Now squeeze the egg in two, said the wolf. So Boots squeezed the egg to pieces, and the giant burst at once. Now, when he had made an end of the giant, Boots rode back again on the wolf to the giant's house, and there stood all his 6 brothers alive and merry, with their brides. Then Boots went into the hillside after his bride, and so they all set off home again to their father's house. And you may fancy how glad the old king was when he saw all his 7 sons come back, each with his bride. But the loveliest bride of all is the bride of Boots, after all, said the king, and he shall sit uppermost at the table, with her by his side. So he sent out, and called a great wedding feast, and the mirth was both loud and long, and if they have not done feasting, why, they are still at it. End of section 9. Recording by Vaughan.
Section 10 of East of the Sun and West of the Moon. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Leonard Wilson. East of the Sun and West of the Moon by Peter Christen ASBJØRNSEN and Jørgen Engebretsen MOE. Translated by George Webb Dasent. Section 10. The Princess on the Glass Hill. Once on a time there was a man who had a meadow which lay high up on the hillside, and in the meadow was a barn which he had built to keep his hay in. Now I must tell you there hadn't been much in the barn for the last year or two, for every St. John's night, when the grass stood greenest and deepest, the meadow was eaten down to the very ground the next morning, just as if a whole drove of sheep had been there feeding on it overnight. This happened once, and it happened twice. So at last the man grew weary of losing his crop of hay, and said to his sons, for he had 3 of them, and the youngest was nicknamed Boots, of course, that now one of them must go and sleep in the barn in the outlying field when St. John's night came. For it was too good a joke that his grass should be eaten root and blade this year as it had been the last 2 years. So whichever of them went must keep a sharp lookout. That was what their father said. Well, the eldest son was ready to go and watch the meadow. Trust him for looking after the grass. It shouldn't be his fault if man or beast or the fiend himself got a blade of grass. So when evening came he set off to the barn and lay down to sleep. But a little on in the night came such a clatter and such an earthquake that walls and roof shook and groaned and creaked. Then up jumped the lad and took to his heels as fast as ever he could, nor dared he once look round till he reached home. And as for the hay, why, it was eaten up this year just as it had been twice before. The next St. John's night the man said again it would never do to lose all the grass in the outlying field year after year in this way, so one of his sons must just trudge off to watch it, and watch it well too. Well, the next oldest son was ready to try his luck, so he set off and lay down to sleep in the barn as his brother had done before him. But as the night wore on, there came on a rumbling and quaking of the earth, worse even than on the last St. John's night, and when the lad heard it he got frightened and took to his heels as though he were running a race. Next year the turn came to Boots, but when he made ready to go, the other 2 began to laugh and to make game of him, saying, "You're just the man to watch the hay, that you are. You who have done nothing all your life but sit in the ashes and toast yourself by the fire." But Boots did not care a pin for their chattering, and stumped away as evening grew on, up the hillside to the outlying field. There he went inside the barn and lay down. But in about an hour's time the barn began to groan and creak, so that it was dreadful to hear. "Well," said Boots to himself, "if it isn't worse than this, I can stand it well enough." A little while after came another creak, and an earthquake, so that the litter in the barn flew about the lad's ears. "Oh," said Boots to himself, "if it isn't worse than this, I dare say I can stand it out." But just then came a third rumbling and a third earthquake, so that the lad thought walls and roof were coming down on his head. But it passed off, and all was still as death about him. "It'll come again, I'll be bound," thought Boots. But no, it didn't come again. Still it was, and still it stayed. But after he had lain a little while, he heard a noise, as if a horse were standing just outside the barn door and cropping the grass. He stole to the door and peeped through a chink, and there stood a horse feeding away, so big and fat and grand a horse Boots had never set eyes on. By his side on the grass lay a saddle and bridle, and a full set of armor for a knight, all of brass, so bright that the light gleamed from it. "Ho, ho!" thought the lad, "it's you, is it, that eats up our hay? I'll soon put a spoke in your wheel, just see if I don't." So he lost no time, but took the steel out of his tinder box and threw it over the horse. Then it had no power to stir from the spot, and became so tame that the lad could do what he liked with it. So he got on its back and rode off with it to a place which no one knew of, and there he put up the horse. When he got home, his brothers laughed and asked how he had fared. "You didn't lie long in the barn, even if you had the heart to go so far as the field." "Well," said Boots, "all I can say is, I lay in the barn till the sun rose, and neither saw nor heard anything. I can't think what there was in the barn to make you both so afraid." "A pretty story," said his brothers, "but we'll soon see how you have watched the meadow." So they set off, but when they reached it, there stood the grass as deep and thick as it had been overnight. Well, the next St. John's Eve it was the same story over again. Neither of the elder brothers dared to go out to the outlying field to watch the crop. But Boots, he had the heart to go, and everything happened just as it had happened the year before. First a clatter and an earthquake, then a greater clatter and another earthquake, and so on a third time. Only this year the earthquakes were far worse than the year before. Then all at once everything was as still as death, and the lad heard how something was cropping the grass outside the barn door. So he stole to the door and peeped through a chink. And what do you think he saw? Why, another horse standing right up against the wall and chewing and champing with might and main. It was far finer and fatter than that which came the year before, and it had a saddle on its back, and a bridle on its neck, and a full suit of mail for a knight lay by its side, all of silver, and as grand as you would wish to see. "Ho, ho!" said Boots to himself, "it's you that gobbles up our hay, is it? I'll soon put a spoke in your wheel." And with that he took the steel out of his tinder box and threw it over the horse's crest, which stood as still as a lamb. Well, the lad rode this horse too to the hiding place where he kept the other one, and after that he went home. "I suppose you'll tell us," said one of the brothers, "there's a fine crop this year too up in the hayfield." "Well, so there is," said Boots, and off ran the others to see. And there stood the grass, thick and deep, as it was the year before. But they didn't give Boots softer words for all that. Now when the third St. John's Eve came, the two elder brothers still hadn't the heart to lie out in the barn and watch the grass, for they had got so scared at heart the nights they lay there before, that they couldn't get over the fright. But Boots, he dared to go, and to make a very long story short, the very same thing happened this time as had happened twice before. 3 earthquakes came, one after the other, each worse than the one which went before, and when the last came, the lad danced about with a shock from one barn wall to the other, and after that, all at once it was still as death. Now when he had laid a little while, he heard something tugging away at the grass outside the barn. So he stole again to the door chink and peeped out, and there stood a horse close outside, far, far bigger and fatter than the 2 he had taken before. "Ho, ho!" said the lad to himself. "It's you, is it, that comes here eating up our hay? I'll soon stop that. I'll soon put a spoke in your wheel." So he caught up his steel and threw it over his horse's neck, and in a trice it stood as if it were nailed to the ground, and Boots could do as he pleased with it. Then he rode off with it to the hiding place where he kept the other two, and then went home. When he got home, his two brothers made game of him as they had done before, saying they could see he had watched the grass well, for he looked for all the world as if he were walking in his sleep, and many other spiteful things they said. But Boots gave no heed to them, only asking them to go and see for themselves, and when they went, there stood the grass as fine and deep this time as it had been twice before. Now you must know that the king of the country where Boots lived had a daughter, whom he would only give to the man who could ride up over the hill of glass, for there was a high, high hill, all of glass, as smooth and slippery as ice, close by the king's palace. Upon the tip-top of the hill the king's daughter was to sit, with 3 golden apples in her lap, and the man who could ride up and carry off the 3 golden apples was to have half the kingdom, and the princess to wife. This the king had stuck up on all the church doors in his realm, and had given it out in many other kingdoms besides. Now this princess was so lovely that all who set eyes on her fell over head and ears in love with her, whether they would or no. So I needn't tell you how all the princes and knights who heard of her were eager to win her to wife, and half the kingdom beside, and how they came riding from all parts of the world on high prancing horses, and clad in the grandest clothes, for there wasn't one of them who hadn't made up his mind that he, and he alone, was to win the princess. So when the day of trial came, which the king had fixed, there was such a crowd of princes and knights under the glass hill that it made one's head whirl to look at them, and every one in the country who could even crawl along was off to the hill, for they were all eager to see the man who was to win the princess. So the 2 elder brothers set off with the rest. But as for Boots, they said outright he shouldn't go with them, for if they were seen with such a dirty changeling, all begrimed with smut from cleaning their shoes and sifting cinders in the dust hole, they said folk would make game of them. "Very well," said Boots, "it's all one to me. I can go alone, and stand or fall by myself." Now when the 2 brothers came to the hill of glass, the knights and princes were all hard at it, riding their horses till they were all in a foam. But it was no good, by my troth, for as soon as ever the horses set foot on the hill, down they slipped, and there wasn't one who could get a yard or 2 up. And no wonder, for the hill was as smooth as a sheet of glass, and as steep as a house wall. But all were eager to have the princess and half the kingdom, so they rode and slipped and slipped and rode, and still it was the same story over again. At last all their horses were so weary that they could scarce lift a leg, and in such a sweat that the lather dripped from them, and so the knights had to give up trying any more. So the king was just thinking that he would proclaim a new trial for the next day, to see if they would have better luck, when all at once a knight came riding up on so brave a steed that no one had ever seen the like of it in his born days, and the knight had mail of brass, and the horse a brass bit in his mouth, so bright that the sunbeams shone from it. Then all the others called out to him he might as well spare himself the trouble of riding at the hill, for it would lead to no good. But he gave no heed to them, and put his horse at the hill, and went up it like nothing for a good way, about a third of the height. And when he had got so far, he turned his horse round, and rode down again. So lovely a knight the princess thought she had never yet seen, and while he was riding, she sat and thought to herself, would to heaven he might only come up and down the other side. And when she saw him turning back, she threw down one of the golden apples after him, and it rolled down into his shoe. But when he got to the bottom of the hill, he rode off so fast that no one could tell what had become of him. That evening all the knights and princes were to go before the king, that he who had ridden so far up the hill might show the apple which the princess had thrown. But there was no one who had anything to show. One after the other they all came, but not a man of them could show the apple. At even the brothers of Boots came home too, and had such a long story to tell about the riding up the hill. First of all, they said there was not one of the whole lot who could get so much as a stride up. But at last came one who had a suit of brass mail, and a brass bridle and saddle, all so bright that the sun shone from them a mile off. He was a chap to ride, just. He rode a third of the way up the hill of glass, and he could easily have ridden the whole way up if he chose. But he turned round and rode down, thinking maybe that was enough for once. "Oh, I should so like to have seen him, that I should," said Boots, who sat by the fireside and stuck his feet into the cinders, as was his wont. "Oh," said his brothers, "you would you? You look fit to keep company with such high lords, nasty beast that you are, sitting there amongst the ashes." Next day the brothers were all setting off again, and Boots begged them this time too to let him go with them and see the riding. But no, they wouldn't have him at any price. He was too ugly and nasty, they said. "Well, well," said Boots, "if I go at all, I must go by myself. I'm not afraid." So when the brothers got to the hill of glass, all the princes and knights began to ride again, and you may fancy they had taken care to shoe their horses sharp. But it was no good. They rode and slipped and rode, just as they had done the day before, and there was not one who could get so far as a yard up the hill. And when they had worn out their horses, so that they could not stir a leg, they were all forced to give it up as a bad job. So the king thought he might as well proclaim that the riding should take place the day after for the last time, just to give them one chance more. But all at once it came across his mind that he might as well wait a little longer to see if the knight in brass mail would come this day too. Well, they saw nothing of him, but all at once came one riding on a steed far, far braver and finer than that on which the knight in brass had ridden, and he had silver mail, and a silver saddle and bridle, all so bright that the sunbeams gleamed and glanced from them far away. Then the others shouted out to him again, saying he might as well hold hard and not try to ride up the hill, for all his trouble would be thrown away. But the knight paid no heed to them, and rode straight at the hill, and right up it, till he had gone 2/3 of the way, and then he wheeled his horse round and rode down again. To tell the truth, the princess liked him still better than the knight in brass, and she sat and wished he might only be able to come right up to the top and down the other side. But when she saw him turning back, she threw the second apple after him, and it rolled down and fell into his shoe. But as soon as ever he had come down from the hill of glass, he rode off so fast that no one could see what became of him. At even, when all were to go in before the king and the princess, that he who had the golden apple might show it, in they went, one after the other. But there was no one who had any apple to show, and the two brothers, as they had done on the former day, went home and told how things had gone, and how all had ridden at the hill, and none got up. But last of all, they said, came one in a silver suit, and his horse had a silver saddle and a silver bridle. He was just a chap to ride, and he got 2/3 up the hill, and then turned back. He was a fine fellow, and no mistake, and the princess threw the second gold apple to him. "Oh," said Boots, "I should so like to have seen him too, that I should." "A pretty story," they said. "Perhaps you think his coat of mail was as bright as the ashes you are always poking about and sifting, you nasty, dirty beast." The third day everything happened as it had happened the 2 days before. Boots begged to go and see the sight, but the two wouldn't hear of his going with them. When they got to the hill, there was no one who could get so much as a yard up it, and now all waited for the knight in silver mail, but they neither saw nor heard of him. At last came one riding on a steed so brave that no one had ever seen his match, and the knight had a suit of golden mail, and a golden saddle and bridle, so wondrous bright that the sunbeams gleamed from them a mile off. The other knights and princes could not find time to call out to him not to try his luck, for they were amazed to see how grand he was. So he rode right up the hill, and tore up it like nothing, so that the princes hadn't even time to wish that he might get up the whole way. As soon as ever he reached the top, he took the third golden apple from the princess's lap, and then turned his horse and rode down again. As soon as he got down, he rode off at full speed, and was out of sight in no time. Now when the brothers got home at even, you may fancy what long stories they told, how the riding had gone off that day, and amongst other things they had a deal to say about the knight in golden mail. "He was just a chap to ride," they said. "So grand a knight isn't to be found in the wide world." "Oh," said Boots, "I should so like to have seen him, that I should." "Ah," said his brothers, "his mail shone a deal brighter than the glowing coals which you're always poking and digging at. Nasty, dirty beast that you are!" Next day all the knights and princes were to pass before the king and the princess. It was too late to do so the night before, I suppose, that he who had the gold apple might bring it forth. But one came after another, first the princes, and then the knights, and still no one could show the gold apple. "Well," said the king, "some one must have it, for it was something we all saw with our own eyes, how a man came and rode up and bore it off." So he commanded that every man who was in the kingdom should come up to the palace and see if they could show the apple. Well, they all came one after another, but no one had the golden apple, and after a long time the two brothers of Boots came. They were the last of all, so the king asked them if there was no one else in the kingdom who hadn't come. "Oh, yes," they said, "we have a brother, but he never carried off the golden apple. He hasn't stirred out of the dust hole on any of the 3 days." "Never mind that," said the king. "He may as well come up to the palace like the rest." So Boots had to go up to the palace. "How now," said the king, "have you got the golden apple? Speak out." "Yes, I have," said Boots. "Here is the first, and here is the second, and here is the third too." And with that he pulled all 3 golden apples out of his pocket, and at the same time threw off his sooty rags, and stood before them in his gleaming golden mail. "Yes," said the king, "you shall have my daughter, and half my kingdom, for you well deserve both her and it." So they got ready for the wedding, and Boots got the princess to wife, and there was great merry-making at the bridal feast, you may fancy, for they could all be merry, though they couldn't ride up the hill of glass. And all I can say is, if they haven't left off their merry-making yet, why, they're still at it. End of Section 10, The Princess on the Glass Hill. Recording by Leonard Wilson of Springfield, Ohio.
Bear with me a moment. I clicked the X instead of switching over. You know, 'cause I'm professional like that. You know, just the way it is. I'm way professional. This is professional operation. And we are ready to go. Princess of the Glass Hill, The Widow's Son is next. Terry Billy Goat's Gruff, and so Thursday it'll be about 40 minutes, but the last ones.
Section 11 of East of the Sun and West of the Moon. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Claudia Wilson. East of the Sun and West of the Moon by Christen ASBJØRNSEN and Jørgen Engebretsen MOE. Translated by George Webb Toussaint. Section 11. The Widow's Son. Once on a time there was a poor, poor widow who had an only son. She dragged on with the boy till he had been confirmed, and then she said she couldn't feed him any longer. He must just go out and earn his own bread. So the lad wandered out into the world, and when he had walked a day or so, a strange man met him. "Whither away?" asked the man. "Oh, I'm going out into the world to try and get a place," said the lad. "Will you come and serve me?" said the man. "Oh, yes, just as soon you as anyone else," said the lad. "Well, you'll have a good place with me," said the man, "for you'll only have to keep me company, and do nothing at all else beside." So the lad stopped with him, and lived on the fat of the land, both in meat and drink, and had little or nothing to do, but he never saw a living soul in that man's house. So one day the man said, "Now I'm going off for 8 days, and that time you'll have to spend here all alone, but you must not go into any one of these 4 rooms here. If you do, I'll take your life when I come back." "No," said the lad, he'd be sure not to do that. But when the man had been gone 3 or 4 days, the lad couldn't bear it any longer, but went into the first room, and when he got inside he looked round, but he saw nothing but a shelf over the door where a bramble-bush rod lay. "Well, indeed," thought the lad, "a pretty thing to forbid my seeing this." So when the 8 days were out, the man came home, and the first thing he said was, "You haven't been into any of these rooms, of course?" "No, no, that I haven't," said the lad. "I'll soon see that," said the man, and went at once into the room where the lad had been. "Nay, but you have been in here," said he, "and now you shall lose your life." Then the lad begged and prayed so hard that he got off with his life, but the man gave him a good thrashing, and when it was over, they were as good friends as ever. Some time after the man set off again, and said he should be away 14 days, but before he went he forbade the lad to go into any of the rooms he had not been in before. As for that he had been in, he might go into that, and welcome. Well, it was the same story over again, except that the lad stood out 8 days before he went in. In this room, too, he saw nothing but a shelf over the door, and a big stone, and a pitcher of water on it. "Well, after all, there's not much to be afraid of my seeing here," thought the lad. But when the man came back, he asked if he had been into any of the rooms. No, the lad hadn't done anything of the kind. "Well, well, I'll soon see that," said the man. And when he saw the lad had been in them after all, he said, "Ah, now I'll spare you no longer, now you must lose your life." But the lad begged and prayed for himself again, and so this time too he got off with stripes, though he got as many as his skin would carry. But when he got sound and well again, he led just as easy a life as ever, and he and the man were just as good friends. So a while after the man was to take another journey, and now he said he should be away 3 weeks, and he forbade the lad anew to go into the 3rd room, for if he went in there he might just make up his mind at once to lose his life. Then after 14 days the lad couldn't bear it, but crept into the room, but he saw nothing at all in there but a trap door on the floor, and when he lifted it up and looked down, there stood a great copper cauldron, which bubbled up and boiled away down there, but he saw no fire under it. "Well, I should just like to know if it's hot," thought the lad, and struck his finger down into the broth, and when he pulled it out again, lo! it was gilded all over. So the lad scraped and scrubbed it, but the gilding wouldn't go off. So he bound a piece of rag round it, and when the man came back and asked what was the matter with his finger, the lad said he'd given it such a bad cut. But the man tore off the rag, and then he soon saw what was the matter with the finger. First he wanted to kill the lad outright, but when he wept and begged, He only gave him such a thrashing that he had to keep his bed 3 days. After that the man took down a pot from the wall, and rubbed him over with some stuff out of it, and so the lad was as sound and fresh as ever. So after a while the man started off again, and this time he was to be away a month. But before he went he said to the lad, if he went into the 4th room, he might give up all hope of saving his life. Well, the lad stood out for 2 or 3 weeks, but then he couldn't hold out any longer. He must and would go into that room, and so in he stole. There stood a great black horse, tied up in a stall by himself, with a manger of red-hot coals at his head, and a truss of hay at his tail. Then the lad thought this all wrong, so he changed them about, and put the hay at his head. Then said the horse, "Since you are so good at heart as to let me have some food, I'll set you free, that I will. For if the troll comes back and finds you here, he'll kill you outright. But now you must go up to the room which lies just over this, and take a coat of mail out of those that hang there, and mind, whatever you do, don't take any of the bright ones, but the most rusty of all you see. That's the one to take. And sword and saddle you must choose for yourself just in the same way." So the lad did all that, but it was a heavy load for him to carry them all down at once. When he came back, the horse told him to pull off his clothes and get into the cauldron which stood and boiled in the other room, and bathe himself there. "If I do," thought the lad, "I shall look an awful fright." But for all that he did as he was told. So when he had taken his bath he became so handsome and sleek, and as red and white as milk and blood, and much stronger than he had been before. "Do you feel any change?" asked the horse. "Yes," said the lad. "Try and lift me, then," said the horse. Oh yes, he could do that, and as for the sword, he brandished it like a feather. "Now saddle me," said the horse, "and put on the coat of mail, and then take the bramble-bush rod, and the stone, and the pitcher of water, and the pot of ointment, and then we'll be off as fast as we can." So when the lad had got on the horse, off they went at such a rate he couldn't at all tell how they went. But when he had ridden a while, the horse said, "I think I hear a noise. Look round. Can you see anything?" "Yes, there are ever so many coming after us, at least a score," said the lad. "Aye, aye, that's the troll coming," said the horse. "Now he's after us with his pack." So they rode on a while, until those who followed were close behind them. "Now throw your bramble-bush rod behind you, over your shoulder," said the horse, "but mind you throw it a good way off my back." So the lad did that, and all at once a close, thick bramblewood grew up behind them. So the lad rode on a long, long time, while the troll and his crew had to go home to fetch something to hew their way through the wood. But at last the horse said again, "Look behind you. Can you see anything now?" "Yes, ever so many," said the lad, "as many as would fill a large church." "Aye, aye, that's the troll and his crew," said the horse. "Now he's got more to back him. But now throw down the stone, and mind you throw it far behind me." And as soon as the lad did what the horse said, up rose a great black hill of rock behind him. So the troll had to be off home to fetch something to mine his way through the rock. And while the troll did that, the lad rode a good bit further on. But still the horse begged him to look behind him. And then he saw a troop like a whole army behind him, and they glistened in the sunbeams. "Aye, aye," said the horse, "that's the troll, and now he's got his whole band with him. So throw the pitcher of water behind you, but mind you don't spill any of it upon me." So the lad did that, but in spite of all the pains he took, he still spilled one drop on the horse's flank. So it became a great deep lake, and because of that one drop, the horse found himself far out in it, but still he swam safe to land. But when the trolls came to the lake, they lay down to drink it dry, and so they swilled and swilled till they burst. "Now we're rid of them," said the horse. So when they had gone a long, long while, they came to a green patch in a wood. "Now strip off all your arms," said the horse, "and only put on your ragged clothes, and take the saddle off me, and let me loose. and hang all my clothing and your arms up inside that great hollow lime tree yonder. Then make yourself a wig of fir moss, and go up to the king's palace, which lies close here, and ask for a place. Whenever you need me, only come here and shake the bridle, and I'll come to you." Yes, the lad did all his horse told him, and as soon as ever he put on the wig of moss he became so ugly and pale and miserable to look at, no one would have known him again. Then he went up to the king's palace and begged first for leave to be in the kitchen, and bring in wood and water for the cook. But then the kitchen maid asked him, "Why do you wear that ugly wig? Off with it! I won't have such a fright in here." "No, I can't do that," said the lad, "for I'm not quite right in my head." "Do you think then I'll have you in here about the food?" cried the cook. "Away with you to the coachman. You're best fit to go and clean the stable." But when the coachman begged him to take his wig off, he got the same answer, and he wouldn't have him either. "You'd best go down to the gardener," said he. "You're best fit to go about and dig in the garden." So he got leave to be with the gardener, but none of the other servants would sleep with him, and so he had to sleep by himself under the steps of the summer house. It stood upon beams, and had a high staircase. Under that he got some turf for his bed, and there he lay as well as he could. So when he had been some time at the palace, it happened one morning, just as the sun rose, that the lad had taken off his wig, and stood and washed himself, and then he was so handsome it was a joy to look at him. So the princess saw from her window the lovely gardener's boy, and thought she had never seen anyone so handsome. Then she asked the gardener why he lay out there under the steps. "Oh," said the gardener, "none of his fellow servants will sleep with him, that's why. Let him come up to-night and lie at the door inside my bedroom, and then they'll not refuse to sleep with him any more," said the princess. So the gardener told that to the lad. "Do you think I'll do any such thing?" said the lad. "Why, they'd say next there was something between me and the princess." "Yes," said the gardener, "you've good reason to fear any such thing, you who are so handsome." "Well, well," said the lad, "since it's her will, I suppose I must go." So when he was to go up the steps in the evening, he tramped and stamped so on the way that they had to beg him to tread softly, lest the king should come to know it. So he came into the princess's bedroom, lay down, and began to snore at once. Then the princess said to her maid, "Go gently, and just pull his wig off." And she went up to him. But just as she was going to whisk it off, he caught hold of it with both hands, and said she should never have it. After that he lay down again, and began to snore. Then the princess gave her maid a wink, and this time she whisked off the wig, and there lay the lad so lovely, and white and red, just as the princess had seen him in the morning sun. After that, the lad slept every night in the princess' bedroom. But it wasn't long before the king came to hear how the gardener's lad slept every night in the princess' bedroom, and he got so wroth he almost took the lad's life. He didn't do that, however, but he threw him into the prison tower, and as for his daughter he shut her up in her own room, whence she never got leave to stir day or night. All that she begged, and all that she prayed, for the lad and herself, was no good. The king was only more wroth than ever. Some time after came a war and uproar in the land, and the king had to take up arms against another king, who wished to take the kingdom from him. So when the lad heard that, he begged the jailer to go to the king, and ask for a coat of mail and a sword, and for leave to go to the war. All the rest laughed when the jailer told his errand, and begged the king to let him have an old worn-out suit, that they might have the fun of seeing such a wretch in battle. So he got that, and an old broken-down hack besides, which went upon 3 legs, and dragged the 4th after it. Then they went out to meet the foe, but they hadn't got far from the palace before the lad got stuck fast in a bog with his hack. There he sat and dug his spurs in, and cried "Gee up! Gee up!" to his hack, and all the rest had their fun out of this, and laughed, and made game of the lad as they rode past him. But they were scarcely gone before he ran to the lime tree, threw on his coat of mail, and shook the bridle, and there came the horse in a trice, and said, "Do now your best, and I'll do mine." But when the lad came up, the battle had begun, and the king was in a sad pinch. But no sooner had the lad rushed into the thick of it than the foe was beaten back and put to flight. The king and his men wondered and wondered who it could be who had come to help them, but none of them got so near him as to be able to talk to him, and as soon as the fight was over he was gone. When they went back, there sat the lad still in the bog, and dug his spurs into his three-legged hack, and they all laughed again. "No, only just look," they said, "there the fool sits still." The next day when they went out to battle, they saw the lad sitting there still, so they laughed again and made game of him. But as soon as ever they had ridden by, the lad ran again to the lime tree, and all happened as on the first day. Everyone wondered what strange champion it could be that had helped them, but no one got so near him as to say a word to him, and no one guessed it could be the lad. That's easy to understand. So when they went home at night and saw the lad still sitting there on his hack, they burst out laughing at him again, and one of them shot an arrow at him and hit him in the leg. So he began to shriek and to bewail. 'Twas enough to break one's heart, and so the king threw his pocket handkerchief to him to bind his wound. When they went out to the battle the third day, the lad still sat there. "Gee up, gee up," he said to his hack. "Nay, nay," said the king's men, "if he won't stick there till he's starved to death." And then they rode on and laughed at him till they were fit to fall from their horses. When they were gone, he ran again to the lime, and came up to the battle just in the very nick of time. This day he slew the enemy's king, and then the war was over at once. When the battle was over, the king caught sight of his handkerchief, which the strange warrior had bound round his leg, and so it wasn't hard to find him out. So they took him with great joy between them to the palace, and the princess, who saw him from her window, got so glad no one can believe it. "Here comes my own true love," she said. Then he took the pot of ointment and rubbed himself on the leg, and after that he rubbed all the wounded, and so they all got well again in a moment. So he got the princess to wife, but when he went down into the stable where his horse was, on the day the wedding was to be, there it stood so dull and heavy, and hung its ears down, and wouldn't eat its corn. So when the young king, for he was now a king and had got half the kingdom, spoke to him and asked what ailed him, the horse said, "Now I have helped you on, and now I won't live any longer. So just take the sword and cut my head off." "No, I'll do nothing of the kind," said the young king. "But you shall have all you want, and rest all your life." "Well," said the horse, "if you don't do as I tell you, see if I don't take your life somehow." So the king had to do what he asked. But when he swung the sword and was to cut his head off, he was so sorry he turned away his face, for he would not see the stroke fall. But as soon as ever he had cut off the head, there stood the loveliest prince on the spot where the horse had stood. "Why, where in all the world did you come from?" asked the king. "It is I who was a horse," said the prince, "for I was king of that land whose king you slew yesterday. He it was who threw this troll's shape over me, and sold me to the troll. But now he is slain I get my own again, and you and I will be neighbour kings, but war we will never make on one another." And they didn't either, for they were friends as long as they lived, and each paid the other very many visits. End of section 11. The Widow's Son.
This is an interesting story for sure. Like, wow. That's straight. Yeah, yeah, well, stories like that, I'd have to say it'd be weird. I can't say much. I'm a newfie. Strange is what we do. So, thank you for stopping by, guys. I appreciate it. always enjoy it. Sorry my hand camera's not working well enough. Things kind of blurry and it's no use to do that. So this is kind of the way things will be until I can manage to get it replaced. So sorry about that. But anyway, I'm still creating. Yay! So, just creating something different. That's all good. Okay, I'm going to let you guys go. And I love you. And like, subscribe, all that kind of fun stuff. And remember, the way my likes used to be is you press the like button and it would tweet out. That's how I had it set up. But now it doesn't do that anymore. YouTube took that away. So you have to actually click the share button to get it to share. So thanks. Love you guys. And we'll talk to you later. Bye.